That's part of my first memories of Franklin. Post office box.
Meeting of the Joint Conceptual Workshop for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission for the night of December the 14th, 2023. So welcome, everybody, and Merry Christmas. And so we're on our normal December schedule. We 10 months out of the year, we meet on the fourth Thursday of the month, and because Thanksgiving is always a conflict with that, and Christmas and the holidays is a conflict with December, we just have one meeting on the second week of December. So tonight's the night. So we'll start off with are there any announcements at this point, Emily?
Yes, hold on just one second.
I was just reminded. So with the coming calendar year and with inflation, as everyone is well aware of, we have updated and published our new surety calculator for updated pricing on all construction activities will become public assets in the future. So those numbers are out there on the website. If you have any questions, please contact engineering, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you may have. It reflects current really CIP pricing that we've been getting, so those numbers are accurate to what construction costs are. They are obviously higher, so I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have right now.
Okay, that's an updated surety calculator, so, thank you, Jimmy. So I failed to run through our roll call vote, so Commissioner Allen's not here yet. Commissioner Frank Scott Harrison.
Present.
Commissioner Lindsay's present. Commissioner McLemore.
Present.
Commissioner Mann, not yet. Commissioner Orr
Present.
and Alderman Peterson
Here.
and Commissioner Williamson.
Present.
Okay, and Alderman Berger, not yet. Alderman Brown.
Present.
Alderman Potts.
Present.
Alderman Baggett, I think, is sick tonight. Alderman Barnhill. Alderman Blanton, not yet. Alderman Caesar.
Here.
And Mayor Moore.
Present.
Okay. So item number one tonight, we've got 30-minute schedule for the discussion of this item. This is a discussion of a development plan revision proposing a reduction of approximately 75,136 square feet of non-residential space and an addition of 223 residential units on approximately 93.32 acres located at the intersection of McEwen Drive and Aspen Grove Drive. This is the McEwen Place Town Center Development Plan Revision Number 8. So we'll start off with staff presentation.
Thank you. McEwen Town Center is a development that's been under construction for several years by now and is about half built out or so. The reduction or the change or the shift in non-residential to residential still meets the overall intent that was with the approved concept plan, and it still does meet the recommendations of Envision Franklin. So not a whole lot to comment on from that perspective. I will turn it over to Jimmy to speak to the traffic impact analysis.
Yeah, we have received a traffic memo update to the original 2016 study that was done for this development project. It's under review at the moment. In the memo, it's showing a reduction in overall trips. We're working through that with the consultant and validating those numbers. We have some questions and some concerns that we need to work through. Obviously, in the future, we'd like to bring this to you before, we'd like to have all this information to you at this meeting. So at this time, we're unable to say whether we have a negative impact to the traffic or what improvements there may be on coming. So happy to answer any questions you may have about that, but that's where we are right now with the traffic memo, and more to come, obviously, before the voting meetings. We'll bring that to your attention at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you. So we'll turn it over to the applicant for presentation. Mr. Vogren?
Hello, good evening, Mayor, Alderman, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Gary Vogren, Kaiser Vogren Design, representing our client Northwood Raven and Boyle Investment Group. Thank you, Jimmy and Joey, for that intro. I'm going to keep this brief and short. I'm just going to kind of cruise through these slides that we've presented to you all, talk about the project, but really we are here to, as Joey had mentioned, we're actually going to reduce the amount of commercial non-residential to about 63,500 and change, as opposed to what's on your initial application there, and adding the 223 units. So that's what we're talking about today. As you know, McEwen Town Center is a dynamic mixed-use project, and really what we're focusing on, if you look at this graphic on the screen, this shows the entirety of the project, and we're specifically focusing on blocks D and E, which is we're going to rearrange, shuffle some buildings around, move some residential in front, and reduce some of the commercial. So the two ghosted buildings on the plan are blocks D and E. Those are the two buildings we're talking about amending. That block we call D and E. The large building between those is currently under construction on block E, and the rest of it is either built out. I'm not sure if I can point on this, but maybe not. But we are really focusing on the middle block of blocks D and E to rounding out the project that's very successful. So this is the overall campus. As you may or may not know, it's entitled for about 93 acres total. It includes Whole Foods, the Dwell, some office retail districts, but we're focusing on the north side of McEwen, which is the colored piece of the project in the middle. This is the current approved plan. If you look at this, you'll see that there's a mix of blue, red, and yellow and purple in this project. When you look at this graphic, you see a lot of the yellow, which is the residential, as part of this mixed-use project, towards the back of the project. We would like, as part of this amendment for this development plan, is to shift some of the residential to the front of the project, blocks D and E, to really bring some of this, as the market demands, residential to the front, more mixed use to this project. On blocks D right now, across from Perry's, which is labeled on that site plan along McEwen Drive, in front of that, that is right now entitled for a 6-story office over retail. We would like to put residential over retail in that portion on that building, on that block D. The middle building that says under construction, that is a 10-story already approved building, just flanking opposite the park, that is built today. Yeah, that building there. And then that yellow building just south of that, at the time was entitled for sale product over commercial. We would like to advance that building to add a hotel, potentially more residential units for sale, as well as commercial. So that's the change. And then shuffle the hotel, which is purple on block D, to, as I mentioned, that mixed-use building along E. So really just moving some residential to the front, displacing some commercial. I'll just zoom in close. So site plan-wise, this is what we're focusing on, blocks D and E. Moving the residential to a residential office over retail on block D, which is that yellow and red hatch building to the front, right in front of Perry's Steakhouse. Adding a 6 to 8 story mixed-use building with residential over the top, as opposed to the initially approved 6-story office over retail. Again, wrapping the building around the parking deck on block D to, not expose that garage along McEwen Drive, which is a great thing. And just by the way, we've worked with staff on this and just proposing this opportunity to bring residential to the front, and they're for support of that. Looking at block E, as I mentioned, we're displacing that current building. It was 5 stories, which is that, it's kind of the purple and yellow against Spring Creek Drive. Convert that to a 6 to 10 story building with hotel, residential for sale, commercial ground floor on the ground floor retail. So bringing this active element to the front of the project, the residential piece, bring more vibrancy for residents above, but also adding another pocket park adjacent the residential building. I'll show this in a future slide. Adjacent to that building that's red and yellow on this plan to introduce a more dynamic park adjacent to current wine bar, Jenny's, just animating that piece. So again, we're adding 200 units on Block D with retail ground floor. On Block E, adding 75 units, ground floor retail, and a hotel on that block as well. And I'll show you some plans that kind of highlight that. And those two ghosted buildings are the two buildings we're talking about on that plan. This is Block E that is currently under construction right now. This is the office over retail that is going to be flanking the park in the center of the project, right in front of Jenny's Ice Cream, the McEwen Wine Bar. This is just flanking opposite across the existing building. Animated ground floor retail office above, just another angle of that building there. And this is approved project. We just show you the flavor of what's going on here, but this is the approved building right here. This is just another view down the back side of that 10-story office building with ground floor retail restaurants, creating this festive space in the back, much like you currently see on the front park of the project right now. This is the proposed residential over retail that would displace the current office over retail. This is coming down Aspen Grove Drive. You're kind of, the viewpoint is standing from Shake Shack, Fink's, Aspen Grove Drive is right in the foreground. So this shows this concrete residential structure over retail, still animating the street, but bringing residential to the front of the project with an amenity pool between the two buildings, and then wrapping ground floor residential as you go left or right along the building.
Is that Perry's on the right edge over?
Perry's is on the right-hand side, yes.
Okay, so it's across the street.
Perry's to the right, and what we call Block A office towers to the left. So this is kind of right as you're coming into the development.
All right.
So this is the view, and we'll work with staff on the final renderings, but this is a good case of what this building's going to look like, but details always provided as we move into site plan. So this is that 6 to 8-story residential over retail. Another shot of the same building on McEwen Drive right now. Perry's is now to the left, bottom left, with the office tower in the background. And then the parking lot where Perry's is just overlooking to the back where this residential over retail is. So again, just amenitizing residential in this quadrant of the project as market demands, and just bringing people more liveliness to the streetscape. This is internal to the park, the project. This is now looking towards McEwen, coming up Aspen Grove. And as I mentioned, we're adding another little pocket park in this location to really engage the space, activate it, ground floor dining, restaurants, retail spilling into this park, just another amenity. This park is about half the length of the current park out there now, relatively close, same width, so very dynamic and active use. But you can see elevated retail on the ground floor, residential above, 6 to 8 stories in this location. That's just back to the overall master plan. And these are just snapshots that kind of swing you around the project. In the foreground, you can see this 6 to 8-story residential over retail with the pool amenity in the middle. That sea of parking in the front is where the Perry Steakhouse is, just for orientation. And then the building in the back, can you point on this thing? Oh, there we go. This building right here is that 6 to 10-story building that was initially approved for 5 stories. So we're adding the residential here, 200 units, ground floor retail. And this is a mixed-use building with a mix of potential hotel, residential, commercial, and for sale products. So a mix of for sale and for rent in the project, as we always committed to, and working with you all through that process. So this kind of spins around. I'll go back to the end. This kind of shows the overall flavor of the development, highlighting exactly what I talked about of the residential over retail, the approved and under construction Block E office over retail, and the mixed-use hotel, residential, commercial on this building as well, all anchored by structured parking and some on-street parking, much akin to McEwen as this is today. So
How many levels of parking do you have in that?
5.
5 levels?
Yeah, we always want to animate the building above the parking structure, hide that structure, wrap it some way, either retail, commercial, office, hotel, residential. So that's my conclusion of this presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions as we go through it. But we go before Planning Commission in January, are here you with tonight, then get to the Mayor and Board of Aldermen if we so get the chance to move forward. So I'll open up the floor with any questions.
I guess one question I have is for the residential that you're putting in there. I'm assuming it's, of course, going to have its dedicated parking. For the retail that's going in there, is that going to have also new added dedicated parking, or will it be using the existing parking structures that are there?
No, this, I'll go back to the site plan. Oop, I guess I can use this. So all the parking would be associated with all these buildings are part of this large parking deck on blocks D and E. There's some surface parking that's mainly for the Perry Steakhouse, but the primary use of parking is ground floor retail dedication for the first level, and above that would be for residential, mixed-use office as well. So everything's encapsulated with some on-street parking parallel, but primarily in the parking structure.
So the new phase accommodates its own parking calculations
Correct.
for everything?
Yep, much like you see out there today for what's built.
Okay, yeah, and I think the only other thing I'd be curious on the traffic study to see
Sure.
how that comes back, because I
Right.
know that's a different mix.
Very important, yeah. The beauty of adding more residential, it allows more self-captured walkability and traffic off the streets, but that's something we're working with staff on, and we've got our great team working on that as part of that process, so, yes.
Okay.
How
Michael?
how does the elevation of the structure that has that wraps around the pool compare to the medical office building that's up on the hill there to the right?
Let's go back.
Do you have a section or anything that shows that?
Back to this one. So Michael, are you talking about comparison of what building to which one?
It's the
This
one that's
one
been
here?
on the hill across it from Coles on Mallory forever.
Oh, this? The jury?
No, on the corner.
Yeah.
Sorry,
you're
I'll
fine.
step
Go
in
ahead.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
pinch hit on a couple of these questions.
Appreciate it.
So the building on the corner, it's, forget the name of the office building. The same gentleman owned some land next to the city water tower and I think had some issues there. But the amenities there, if you flip back to that slide, whoever's driving. The, probably the aerial that shows kind of the view from Perry's. The amenity deck that you see in the photo there is pretty much at grade with kind of the porte-cochere and the parking from Perry's. So you're probably 10 to 20 feet below the elevation where the Kulo office building is on the corner. So that you're kind of really diving down that hill. That's built today. We're not adjusting any of those grades. So if you,
So that's still going to be the highest point,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
the existing one?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Kulo building.
Yeah, the Kulo building, and so we're not adjusting any of the parking lot that's already existing for Perry's
Perry's
today,
Steakhouse.
with the exception that there are some current head-in parking stalls facing north into kind of a gravel field. Those would get revised from head-in to parallel,
Right here.
but they would kind of keep the same road profile. We're not adjusting any of the grades through there, if that makes sense. So there is anticipated kind of on that L-shaped corner wrapping the D deck, that there would be at grade with the parking lot there is kind of the apartment leasing office and things like that. So to really invite kind of that foot traffic between there and the Perry's are all kind of on that same grade. And if you've been over there recently, that road now continues across the street into kind of like the Finks entry in that drive aisle that crosses Aspen Grove now. So all those grades are the same.
Yeah, and we would activate that residential, some of the residential is fronting on that street as well. So like Adam mentioned, some amenity, but also some residential units that's encouraged by Envision Franklin.
The site, unfortunately, and it shows up in one of those renderings, if you go to the black and white profile, the pool does look like it's slightly elevated in the rendering here.
Yeah.
Because not only is the site falling from south to north, but it's falling from east to west across the site. So we're terracing that pool slightly, but it's not being raised up out of the ground to be kind of disproportionate with the parking lot. It's really to hold the grade as you go with the cross slope kind of going across the site.
And where is the pool again?
It's kind of inside the building footprint,
Right here, Roger.
kind of this amenity deck.
Okay.
That U-shaped courtyard is the amenity.
Okay.
Kind of inscribed by the
Yeah.
apartments.
Thank you, Al.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
I think the only other question I might have is, in this particular view, you see kind of that open side of the parking deck there is,
This?
yeah, the grade increase, it goes up from that point, right? So it's
Correct.
not gonna be where you're gonna be able to
Yeah,
see
we're
it
looking
from
at
each side.
regrading that
So
edge.
those parking lot, or I'm sorry, those parking decks, the site plans have already been approved on those. We've pulled the building permit for, call it the northern half that is, of the parking deck.
Yeah.
And then the site plan has been approved for the parking deck that's, call it the Block D parking deck. That's the one closest to you in the picture. And so we have 50% drawings done internally on those. We haven't submitted those for permit, but we're working kind of with the confines of the parking garages that have already been approved. And really, one of the beauties of the deletion of the office and the incorporation of the residential is that the parking count is essentially the same. And so we are, as staff mentioned earlier, working through with staff on the parking study, or the traffic study, but from the parking study, that garage, to your question earlier, we would have dedicated secured parking for the residential on the upper decks inscribed in that Block D portion, so.
And then maybe from a staff perspective, I know there were issues with the parking garages across the interstate and over at what is now Snyder Electric over there. Have we resolved the issues related to the exterior finish on parking decks and those kinds of things?
The zoning ordinance has been updated to have different requirements for exterior elevations of parking decks, but this development plan, I believe, is vested under a different zoning ordinance. Is that correct?
Vested under the 2020
So this development plan is vested under the 2020 zoning ordinance, so then it would or would not, it would,
it was
the
19, was it
new
19?
standards would apply to this.
I think it was 19.
Sorry,
19 for this one.
2019. We do have some new parking structure requirements in the 2019 zoning ordinance, and staff will look at those. They're different based on if a building is behind another building and whether or not it faces an arterial or collector road or not. So we'll make sure that it meets the zoning ordinance for those requirements.
And I think just to clarify, or to add to what Amy just said, we are proposing to wrap the building on all of the publicly exposed sides. So the site plan for the garages that have already been approved are abutting kind of an existing pre-split rock wall along Carmax and the Kulo site. And so unless you're on the back side of those properties, kind of in Carmax's back of house, call it, you won't see these parking decks, if that makes sense. So.
How much additional,
What's going to be the exposure of the south side of the parking deck? You just said.
There's nothing exposed on the south side.
North side, sorry.
North side, there would not
D&E.
be anything exposed on the north side either.
No,
It's
just the eastern.
It'll be
the-
wrapped.
the mixed-use building on the north side
Oh, it
is,
is the east, I'm sorry, there's car.
Yeah, right there.
so the Carmack side would be on the east side. And so it's screened by the topography as well as the Carmack's building itself. Even though we're building up to our property line essentially, we don't have a building screening it, but the topography and the existing Carmack's building do screen it. But just as a reminder, the parking decks that we anticipate using have site plan approvals,
right.
and we have building permits, for those decks, so.
There's a parapet for that very top layer of parking, right? I mean, it goes up 3 or 4 foot, keep the car from going over it, so it's.
Yeah, and I think if I remember in what got designed in Architects Night here tonight, there are cable rails versus kind of a parapet condition on that eastern side, Jimmy.
So you do see the cars possibly.
And so I'd have to go back to see what ultimately was approved, but that.
I got you.
Like I said, that's under construction now. We're pouring footers. So,
I got you.
hopefully we're in keeping with what everybody had approved. So.
Do you remember how many spaces that would provide? There's just never enough parking when you go over in that area. You just have, it's just
I think,
a tapestry.
I think one of the things that we've been blessed with, Alma, is the relative success of McEwen, and the shops being busy, the restaurants being busy. One of the things that we're really pushing for as the project matures is making sure that our property management staff, which we manage, is making sure that our office tenants are parking on the upper floors of the parking decks. So their leases require that they use the upper floors of the parking decks, and the lower floors are reserved for retail patrons. So what fills up first are the easy spots on the parallel parking spots on the streets. And we know that and recognize that, so we're trying to make sure that those, first and second floor spots within the garage are accessible, well-lit, easily accessed, and preferably not occupied by an office user that's parking there all day. So those are on us to make sure that we're maintaining, and we would mimic that on this side of the block compared to what we did on the west side. The other thing that we're doing that we did not do on what we call Block B, which is where Mitsubishi's office are. Block A, where Omni is, and the Block E that's under construction now have what we call sky bridges from the garage to the office tower. So it's trying to incentivize those office workers to park where they're supposed to so they can just walk into a covered bridge into the office. We did not do that on the first building, kind of learned from our mistakes and have done that now on the next two, in hopes that we're freeing up and encouraging more of the ground floor parking for folks like yourself or whomever's coming to visit.
Trying to find a spot in the restaurant.
Yeah, I work in that building and I see the issue that you have, that a lot of the
Oh my
office people do
goodness.
park in those spots.
Nowhere to
so.
park over
So
there.
does
Never.
the CarMax property back up to the roadway down the side of the?
Let me go back to the aerial, Roger, I'll help you out a little bit.
I'm looking for how much, is there additional land that hasn't been, it's not part of this project and hasn't been developed? This butts up to the queue level?
No, everything is fully developed to
Okay.
the
Yeah, there's
east.
CarMax right there, and then this is the Mallory Green, the surface parking lot for Mallory Green, surface parking for
So the little
CarMax.
triangle piece where it says amended, that's their detention
Detention.
pond. So everything to our east is either Kulo or CarMax, and it's
Okay.
fully built out.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Alderman, any questions, comments? Okay.
I think it's a great development, and we go over there a lot as a family, and a couple.
Same here.
Enjoy the amenities. I think you'll do a really good job.
Appreciate it, Scott, thank you.
Yep, good.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Gary.
Appreciate the feedback, thank you.
Okay. The next item. Item number 2 is discussion of a development plan proposing a 14,000 square foot of commercial space in addition to the existing 301,014 square feet of non-residential uses and 244 hotel keys on approximately 21.29 acres with 12 modifications of standards. 1 through 11 relate to signage, and modification of standards number 12 is to parking. This is located at the southwest corner of the intersection of Cool Springs Boulevard and Carruthers Parkway, the Meridian South Development Plan. So, staff.
Thank you. Staff generally supports the plan. There has only been a pre-application meeting, and the applicant anticipates their initial submittal to occur in January, at which time staff will conduct further review, and the plan will be on the joint conceptual agenda again in January. The plan has multiple sign modifications of standard requests, but there was not enough information with their pre-application submittal to discuss at this time. The applicant's requesting one other MOS for reduction in the base rate parking for some of the uses proposed. This proposed modification of standard request is supported with shared parking, national studies, and the study of the site as it stands today. Staff agrees with those findings and supports the request.
Okay, thank you. Is there someone here representing that? Gary?
It's me again. Thank you. Gary Vogren, Kaiser Vogren Design. Thank you again, Chelsea. Appreciate the intro. Again, I'm just going to briefly go through what we're proposing. And as Chelsea had mentioned, we have submitted a pre-app application for the Meridian project. It is currently zoned RC12, Regional Commerce 12, as well as pretty much everything around us, including the Marriott and the existing Meridian campus to the north. We are focusing on this campus here in particular, which is part of the Meridian development. It houses 2 office buildings and the Hilton Hotel and structured parking, and then just a sea of parking. Boyle has gone through great endeavor to really rebrand and create outdoor opportunity and ancillary retail components to Meridian development. Since they developed Meridian, they have done McEwen Northside, saw the success of that project, how just amenitized that is. So now Meridian, they are kind of catching up with McEwen is now. So they're really reanimating Meridian. That's where our office is. So we're loving this and we're part of this project and appreciate it. So we are really focusing on tonight is adding 2 retail buildings to this project. This kind of shows the overall campus. So I'll zoom in tightly. As I mentioned, it's RC12. These are just zoning graphics going from purple to this lavender, which is going to be a PD development. And the reason we have to come before you all to a PD as opposed to RC12, because we could do this retail building just straight up, but we are asking for a modification of standards to reduce parking. It is overparked on the campus. That's why we have to rezone it. In addition, we'd like to amend modification of standards for the signage. They want to rebrand the campus, and we'd like to just animate that in terms of those pieces. But that's the reason why we have to go before you for a PD rezoning. But in big picture, they are really animating the campus. This is an enlargement. The existing 2 Meridian 1 and 2 office buildings are here. Hilton Hotel, Cool Springs Boulevard, parking deck existing. We are displacing existing parking, around 80, 90 spaces or so, with 2 retail buildings totaling 14,000 square feet. The one building here at the corner of Corporate Center Drive and Carruthers is a 10,000 square foot building. In comparison, that's the same size as a Perry Steakhouse, so a great anchor location at Carruthers and Corporate Center Drive, animated by an outdoor event space, much like you see in McEwen, just activating the retail building and having somewhere to go and wait for your table and seat, but also give the users of this campus walkability to this retail as well, tying it all into the Meridian campus general to the north. And then adding another 4,000 square foot building at this location at the terminus of a Corporate Center Drive. These are both 1-story buildings, just displacing parking. This does not need parking structure. We have more than enough on this campus to house this retail building, the office and the hotel. It's a great shared use. We've provided those numbers to staff, just displacing some of that parking. This is parked way more than the current standard is today. Today it's 4 per thousand. Back at this time, this was parked at almost 6 per thousand. So plenty of spaces on this campus. But as I mentioned, Boyle is just reanimating this campus to bring more retail on this part of the site, to activate these streets, create walkability between these office buildings and the hotel, also allow people that's in the campus to the north to tie these all together. I'll point over here. This is the existing Meridian campus. This is where Cajun Steamers is, Jersey Mike's, the hotel, Tupelo is just off the page. They're under construction with some cool amenity right now at this time, also on that Meridian campus. So just tying all that together. I'll just show you exactly what we're talking about in terms of the structure, the detail. So these are just massing diagrams that show where these buildings are placed. The 2 office buildings in the back, foreground, and then the existing Hilton Hotel, Corporate Center Drive, animating the corner of Corporate and Carruthers Parkway here with this retail building, outdoor amenity space, 10,000 square foot building, 4,000 square foot amenity building here, outdoor space, just anchoring these 2 streets that tie together Meridian campus all together. We have a light at Carruthers and Corporate Center, and then Compass takes you back out to the campus on Meridian Boulevard or Tupelo, so another light there. So, but just creating walkability that kind of brings people from both campuses and the internal buildings here to walkability for this retail uses. These are just kind of flipping around, just different viewpoints, but I think you get kind of what the gist of this is. And like I said, we can easily do this in RC12, but because we're asking for a parking modification, we have to go this route. So, but also cleaning up the roundabout here. It's kind of an awkward terminus to the street. We want to clean this up. People get confused. You come to a cul-de-sac, where do you go, where do you turn? Kind of clean this whole little corner up, animate it with signage and buildings, and create something unique on the campus. That's that 4,000, oh no, this is the 10,000 square foot restaurant retail at the corner. So this is what we're going to talk to you next month. We're going to push the signage piece of this. We're asking for modification of signage, but no discussion here. We want to give the staff more information to review, come back with. They're asking, well, how tall is the signage? How big is it? What's the breadth of the signage? What are you talking about? More details, but it's just reinventing the campus signage for the project and creating, as what we work with Cooper Carey Architects and the team, what's the breadcrumb trail? What's the heartbeat of the community? Give it some vibe, much like McEwen Town Center. So just replicating that. So that's it. We're asking for, just want to get your feedback on the layout and then the MOS. Thank you.
Does the signage, a change that's anticipated across that campus, or is it just related to the new structures?
We'd like to start here first on this project specifically, because we have to ask for these modification standards first. And that will evolve over time to bring into the campus to the north. Yes. They want to reinvent and rebrand the entire campus at some point.
And then there would be consistency between the campuses.
That's right. It just all reads holistically. The same signage, the comprehensive package, lighting. We're talking about bringing, this is a lighted tower. No signage. It's just a graphic element that kind of brings you to the space and animates certain heartbeats within our development that we work in specifically, and just bringing some art pieces that are just not art, but it's somewhat art. I guess you can call it that, but it doesn't have a sign on it, but animating the campus. So yes.
Okay. Any commissioners? Nick?
I like the design, especially the redesign of the cul-de-sac. It's a very odd entrance feature.
It's just an old leftover dead end
Yeah.
right away.
But my question is, around the 4,000 square foot retail building, it looks like there's no drive-through feature there, and you're not anticipating one.
No.
Okay.
No, this is more of an amenity feature piece. If you know the campus very well, it's kind of hidden, that building in particular off Carruthers, so it's not your ideal retail space. This is more amenity, could be a CrossFit, training, boxing, with an outdoor spillover, yoga area, lawn, so that's the intent.
Okay. And then the restaurant, if I know you drew the comparison to size with Perry's, but if you put a restaurant like that in there, do you envision some sort of valet parking? Because I just don't see anywhere that would allow for valet parking.
We really haven't gotten into that detail yet, but there may or may not be. I guess that's something we'll get into the details as we move into the project.
Okay. Because I'm just thinking if you did valet parking, it looks like there'd be a further reduction of parking. And I just don't, maybe there's a way to work it in, but.
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity, Nick, to start looking at that. But as I mentioned, there's so much surplus parking out there. You go out there on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The cars are not casting shadows out there at all, which
Yeah.
is fortunate.
Okay.
Mayor?
I'd like to have a better understanding of the walkability of this area. Because I look at your black and white diagrams, and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to be run over by cars racing through the parking lot and so on. So some illustration of that might be a little more helpful to me.
Yeah, so this is the key that both our team, the Boyle team, they want walkability. They want that opportunity. You have it in the Meridian campus proper. This, not so much. There are some extensions of sidewalks that kind of go from, let me blow out a little bit here. Yeah, there we go. There's a sidewalk that connects from this one Meridian all the way to, can you see that, Mayor? I'm not sure. There's a sidewalk that.
Can't see it.
Do it on the back one.
Oh, there we go. We'll go back there. So there's an existing walkway that is on Compass Drive,
Correct.
and there's sidewalks on both sides of Corporate Center Drive, and then obviously Carruthers. So this is all sidewalk connected. We want people to come to these retail from both sides of the campus. There's an existing sidewalk that penetrates between this existing office building to this Compass Way, so that sidewalk's there. We would extend the sidewalk to this building. There's a sidewalk that comes through this location here. Probably not a bad idea. We don't have one here, so maybe this gets extended to this building, but all in all, that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I just couldn't understand it based
Yeah,
on
no,
your
I
drawing.
appreciate
So
that.
if
That's a
you're
good
addressing
question.
it, that
When you
sounds
when
good
you
to
look
me.
at all these graphics, the
Otherwise,
sidewalks
people are
get
going to be
lost.
getting run over in the parking lot.
No, we don't want that, especially you.
Put an EMS station on the side, right?
Yeah, yeah.
No, but that's the intent of the entire campus, to have that walkability. That's what they want, encouraged, much like McEwen.
And there's
Great question.
signs out there in some places that say, you know, people are walking or something. They don't say.
Oh, yeah.
They
People,
have
yeah.
some on
Some people don't
Corporate center.
don't
itself.
follow those, but there are other signs that say pedestrian has the right of way, but people,
Right.
they
gonna
blow
be
right through
good
that.
at
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Alderman? Anybody? Okay, you got off light tonight.
Appreciate it. I was hoping that way. Thank you. Appreciate y'all.
Good
Happy
looking
holidays.
project. Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, next item is the continued discussion of the Envision Franklin update, public draft. So, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Aldermen and Planning Commissioners. Go ahead and start here. We've got a few outstanding issues from the October joint conceptual workshop that we're going to touch on, and then some new changes, the last two, and then we'll close with the next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about Brownland Farm and then changes to Village Green.
Thank you. So as many of you are aware, we brought this item to you specifically to create a new special consideration on the Brownland Farm property to allow for indoor and outdoor commercial recreation uses on this site, as it's being given the design concept of recreation, civic and recreation is what it will be known in the future, but to allow for commercial recreation uses on this site as well, supporting local commercial uses such as physical therapy, sports-related training and services, the related office uses for those, and restaurants and retail uses that support the multipurpose sports complex are also appropriate. The planned district is the appropriate zoning district to implement this vision. That was one of the concerns that was brought forward to us when creating this special consideration, as well as just to ensure that the board and the planning commission are going to be able to look at any sort of development that would occur on this site. So creating the need for a planned district would allow for that to come before you to be voted upon and to be reviewed at that stage. So this special consideration would open up the potential for some type of sportsplex and those associated uses, but would also end up requiring a planned district, or not necessarily requiring, but encouraging a planned district for this site so that it would be able to be reviewed by the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Do we have any questions about that before we move on to the next slide?
Does this answer a lot of the concerns of the people who were very concerned about the Brownland, previous request?
I'm happy to.
Feel free.
I'm happy to answer some of that. When this new plan came up, one of the things I did was I reached out to about 10 or so folks that had been pretty against the original project. Intentionally picked them. I showed what was initially the thought of this project to them to get some feedback. And to a T, every one of them loved this idea, thought we needed this idea, thought it was the right answer for this. Actually had wished that this was what came forward the first time around. Loved that it wasn't residential. Saw the potential, not in it being. Maureen from Visit Franklin said this the other day, which I thought was really smart. She said it's not really a sports complex. It's really a sports district because it's got retail, you've got restaurants but it's all sports themed. It's going to be potentially a really great area for families and especially those with sports. So anyway, Ann, yes, to your question, all positive, not a single negative response to the idea of this plan.
Staff's main concern with that prior development was the residential aspect. So since this does not have any of that, those alleviate a lot of the concerns of the potential flooding of the area. And with a PD coming in and a development plan following, staff will be able to review any and all potential concerns and issues. At that time, this just allows for the potential for something along what Alderman Brown had mentioned to actually be applied for and potentially come forward through the public process.
Okay. I'd like, just from the perspective of how we consider ultimately what goes on that site, this strikes me as being a good, appropriate use. And again, I had concerns and raised those concerns relative to residential use. It seems that the last proposed layout that came in on that project did not respect the presence of the floodway and the buffers in the back, but indeed moved the entire parcel, the entire development, even yet again closer to the floodway. And so it was just, it was just off the rails. And so I think that there should be special consideration to, as we look at the layout of streets around this area, that we look at the potential to provide maybe even a higher level of flood protection. Look at the way we establish our freeboard requirements for that site. Maybe they're a little more stringent than what would be required for a non-residential parcel that's in the floodplain or close to the floodplain. But on this site, given the potential, what we know about the water levels on that site during the 2010 flood, and the fact that even as extreme as they were, that it wasn't even a 100-year flood event at that point in the river. So those are some things I think that would be, to provide a higher level of protection for whatever, just to protect the investment of what goes in out there, whether it's sports facilities, arenas, indoor soccer, whatever may be, because there's nothing worse than coming back from a flood and trying to make a project look good and smell good again after it's been inundated by water. So
we'll continue on to the next topic, which is another one that we brought forward to you to get some general feedback on at the previous meeting. Staff has workshopped some changes to both the neighborhood green and the village green design concepts based upon the feedback that we received last time. As you can see here, this is a very general overview of the verbiage that would be in Envision Franklin for these two design concepts. Neighborhood green, if you remember, has a requirement for 60% dedicated open space, primarily in those large tracts. But in order to encourage open green spaces within the developed area, we are implementing or exploring implementing the allowance of up to 10% of the entire site to be usable open spaces within that developed area, so within the neighborhood rather than on the extremities of the neighborhood in that preserved natural open state. So as you can see on just the smaller bullet point, we still would have the same amount of open space. It would just allow for 10% to be different community amenities within the neighborhood rather than natural preserved open space, which would instead be 50% rather than 60%. Those same stipulations would be placed into the Village Green design concept, except Village Green needing 70% of that dedicated open space would then be 60 plus the 10% community amenities, still again totaling that 70%. The feedback that we received previously was that it was just to be placed into Village Green, but staff thought that it would be appropriate in both the neighborhood green and the Village Green design concepts. This is also a slight change into what is within the public draft. Because of the way that it was written, it created some complications with the math, and we found this to be a much simpler approach.
Okay. Comments, questions?
So what can make up the 10%? Are we talking just a grass strip on the side of the road, or does it actually have to be something that?
So it would, there are, within chapter 11 of the zoning ordinance, there are specific stipulations of what dedicated open space can be. And so there's a larger definition within staff's working draft that does specifically point to those chapter 11 open space types. So I don't believe, Amy's gone. I don't believe that just like strips along the road wouldn't count. It would be something similar to like a courtyard or an open green space, pocket parks. Yeah. So there are quite a few defined green space, open space definitions within Chapter 11 that Envision Franklin would point to as being appropriate. So it would be heavily defined.
Good.
Alderman Brown?
I'll just say I'm still only in favor of adding that allowance onto Village Green. I wish Alderman Baggett was here. I think he might echo a similar comment, but my preference would be only leaving it on the 70%.
And I hated that Alderman Baggett was not here tonight because he spoke extensively on this at our last meeting. And I don't know, have y'all had a chance to talk further with Alderman Baggett about any concerns he may have had or?
We haven't, but I would love to hear feedback from the rest of you as well, as Alderman Brown brought up. If you would like to see this in only Village Green or both in Neighborhood Green and Village Green, staff brought this to you really for feedback tonight, and we're happy to change that back to only Village Green if that's what the group generally has as consensus. The reason that we proposed this initially was that once we started discussing the value of having interspersed community amenities in these specific, very tight-knit neighborhoods, because you're conserving so much open space on the periphery and along the roadway, and then you're really condensing the development to a small area, we started really talking about the value of having green space in that area too. And that's why we proposed it in both Neighborhood Green and Village Green. But if that's not what you're thinking, your thought process is leading you to, we'd love to know that, and we can make that change.
I mean, that's what I would like to see. I'd like to hear why you think it's a bad idea.
Yeah,
'Cause I
think
just
it's
don't, I'm not
great.
following.
Me too.
It's not about the interspersed of it. It really was about trying to make sure that we're driving the development and this open space that we really want. And, you know, we're trying to increase that 70%, trying to give density in certain areas, but trying to increase that larger open space, not just using areas that are undevelopable anyway. And it felt like we took a really great step towards that by taking conservation development and breaking it up into these pieces. And then we started breaking it down already. Like, it feels like we're already giving up a little bit on them. And so I think the sense was just, it's not that we're not wanting, the way you describe that, sounds wonderful, but it feels like we're already sort of giving some give here, and we haven't even launched this thing yet.
Yeah, and I will say, if we went in Neighborhood Green with just 60% dedicated open space and large tracts, and took away that 10% community amenities portion that we're talking about adding, there still will be formal open space requirements in the zoning ordinance. They just will be a lot smaller than what 10% would be. I can't remember the 5%. So you would still get some community amenities, most likely in that area, but it could also be, it may not be as well interspersed. We just don't know. And that's on a, I mean, we could say that for any development. We don't really know until we see it, but it would be a smaller amount of open space that would be required to be formal.
So then, let me ask you on this, is if there's a 5% community kind of amenities area required, so in the case of Neighborhood Green, say the developer opts to do 10%, so this would be in addition to that 5%. So if they max it out, it would be total of 15% community, or would this?
No.
No, so the 5% would be part of the 10%
10%,
allowance.
got it.
Now, realistically, we could end up seeing, and again, as Emily mentioned, we won't know until developments start coming in within this design concept. It's very possible that we could see a neighborhood green development come in with 55% dedicated open space because the land is already there and the developer doesn't want to put in those extra amenities. The 10% is just a allowance where they could do 50 and 10, but they could also do 55 and 5. They could do 50, you know.
And I will say this
3 and
is
7.
an area where staff was really torn on which way to go with neighborhood green because 50% natural open space preservation is the requirement in conservation subdivision today. And we heard that that needed to be increased. So if we're going to increase it to the 60%, then maybe removing the 10% community amenities does make sense. But then we also saw the value. So we've wavered back and forth, quite honestly, and that's why it's been brought to you for discussion tonight.
Well, Emily, it seems that oftentimes as we look at a conservation subdivision and we're leaving this 50% open space around the perimeter, that then we get a request to increase the density of the houses. Let's put in 30 more houses with 45-foot wide lots.
Yep.
So then your density in the core of that development begins to skyrocket.
It does.
So it seems that there would be benefit to, I think, did you just say that if there wasn't a stipulation that 10% be set aside for amenities in the interior of the lot, we'd still have 5% just because of the basic? So it's a matter of 5% versus 10%.
I mean, anytime you can bring some green area in where somebody can actually use it and not be out on the periphery, I think that's a good thing.
I
If
agree.
you cut your
I would
percentages
agree.
so
I
low,
like
I mean,
this,
that's not
yes.
enough to just go stand outside and turn around.
Right, it's not.
Because even if you have, say, something that ends up a little bit more dense, you have to think about the value of that for the residents that live there, and that could be huge. You have a
Yes.
little
Huge.
place that you can go experience, even if, say you have, maybe it's, the example I can think of is, hey, they're on a part of a hillside overlay that's gonna be there anyways, but bringing it in, you know, 'cause
Yes.
most places, I mean, West Haven does it, they put trails up there, but most people will not, so.
I like this plan.
Well, how does that fit into affordable housing or workforce housing? I mean, wouldn't that put a strain on that and just eliminate that opportunity?
Well, this is in targeted areas on the map where we've identified neighborhood green and village green, where conservation of open space has really been the subject of discussion amongst the planning commission and board as a high priority.
Is that
So-
blanket across the?
It's not blanket across the whole city or the UGB. This is in select areas where there are rural corridors, where there's a history of agriculture.
Do we have a map on
We do. We have a map. It's attached in the plan. It's attached in your items.
it? I hadn't seen it.
I think, Jimmy, what you're talking about, if we start putting housing back in there, we're back to where we were before when the
Yeah.
project was denied. Because once again, with floodways and egress, ingress, should it be a flood situation pop up, once again, they're trapped in the floodway. And that's the only reason I've thought about that, but it's the only reason I didn't bring it forward. I think as much open green space as you can put in a development like this, that's basically floodplain, is very productive, but makes it usable for the public.
I would like to clarify, that the 5% zoning ordinance requirement that we've spoken about, as I mentioned previously, could be any of those different types within Chapter 11 of the zoning ordinance. However, the way Envision Franklin is written for this 60 or 70% dedicated open space is meant to be in a natural, large tract, open space area on the periphery of developments. So it's very likely that 5%, if they wanted to do something within the neighborhoods, it would not meet the requirements for the open space within Envision Franklin without a stipulation like this. So we could be looking at roughly 65% open space within one of these neighborhood green developments, because they would have the 5% for the zoning ordinance and then the 60% that Envision Franklin is requiring. So this stipulation for whether it's Village Green or both would allow them to effectively double dip, would allow them to count whatever they do within the neighborhood towards the requirement for Envision Franklin up to that 10%. So they could, again, end up doing just the 5%, but they would effectively get credit for that 5% that's required by the zoning ordinance towards the 60 or 70% that they were needed to do with Envision Franklin, if that makes sense. So this would allow for a little bit more diversification. Otherwise, we would likely end up seeing a lot of developments where their zoning ordinance required open space is something that they can qualify for Envision Franklin as well. So we would likely see a lot of very similar developments so that they would not have to give up additional land.
Did you consider increasing the formal open space to 10% rather than just leaving it 5%?
That would require an amendment to the zoning ordinance, which is not part of the Envision Franklin update process.
Okay, thanks.
So we will be going into a zoning ordinance text amendment after Envision Franklin this revision is adopted. If that is something that is desired by this group, we would be happy to explore that at the time of our zoning ordinance update.
I just wonder how many people are going to step up and put 10% in the entire, in the usable space within the developed area. That's why I asked why not 10%.
We could pull together some numbers of some recent residential developments and what the amount of open space they did actually provide. It might be helpful to know some of that information, because I do think generally in residential developments, we're not sitting at the bare minimum of 5%, but there are cases where that's happening.
But I go back to what I've heard Alderman Peterson say often is that little patch of green isn't very usable. So that's why I'm trying to advocate for a little bigger area, because so many neighborhoods, all they have is their driveway and a small front yard. And where the kids play, driveway or street.
Yeah, I mean,
That brings up the question to me, would that space be residential development? Would it be retail development or commercial development?
Well, we have open space standards that apply to each of those land use types. So the zoning ordinance requires open space for all of them.
Correct, but could not somebody come in and build a retail facility on that 10%? There's a lack of retail in that area, so I could see some opportunity where retail developers may want to come in and try to.
Which area are we?
Brownland Farm.
Oh, okay, sorry. This is actually applies to the neighborhood green and village green design concepts in Envision Franklin. So Brownland Farms actually civic and recreational
Right, okay.
as we're proposed. So, sorry, we just talked about Brownland. We kind of jumped to the next topic. So it got a little confusing.
You got Brownland on the brain.
I always do.
Sorry about that.
Just don't mess with affordable housing and workforce housing. We don't have it. It doesn't exist. It needs to exist. And so please give us some areas to do that with density.
So could we please look at that after we go through this? Could we please look at that? Because from what I understood, because as you were doing that, I was kind of glazing over in my head. I wouldn't want anybody, it sounds like they can double dip. Basically what you just said. And I don't want them to double dip, okay? And not everyone will, but I'd like them not to. So I would like for us to look at that afterwards. Yes.
Other comments, questions? Emily wants feedback from everybody now.
I think we've had a good discussion. I don't know that we have a consensus necessarily, but we can take this back and talk about it and see if there's something we can bring back to you.
So in case I wasn't clear, I like what, since you guys asked, I like what we have here. So I want to be on record as saying that. Okay.
Yeah,
You need,
Yes.
I do too as well, if you need comments from everybody. I can support what's already been proposed.
Agree.
Okay.
I agree. I can support what's being proposed right now. And I live in a neighborhood that fits that. I'm not sure which category exactly it would fall into, neighborhood or village, but I live in the River Bluff neighborhood and we have those pocket parks. And that's, I mean, it is a huge value add where our houses are close together. We got 10 feet between the houses, but you forget immediately that you have neighbors next to you because you have so much open space for the, all the kids to go play. And so there's some real value into putting a lot of green space into the middle of the development.
But would that require more green space than what River Bluff has now?
So this design concept in general for neighborhood green would require either 60% dedicated open space and large tracts. River Bluff, when it was conservation subdivision, would have 50% in large tracts. That's what the requirement was. Large tracts was not really in the plan at that time. It's more interspersed. It's a totally different standard, so it's hard to compare apples to oranges in this situation. But the other option would be 50% natural open space with 10% community amenities. So either way, this adds up to 60%. It's just a matter of where it's placed and how accessible it is to the residents, really. But the intent of this design concept is the preservation of the natural area. So it depends on what your priority is. Is it 50% natural preservation plus some usable space, 10% usable space for the residents, or more 60% natural open space that's in those large open tracts? Right. It's a matter of what your preference is.
Okay. Alderman, Eddie? Alderman Barnhill? Nope.
I'll jump in. I do like the idea of doing 50-10. I know a lot of those, as Mr. Mann was actually speaking about how tight everything is. It give kids and adults somewhere to go. They're not having to walk to the 50%. I like the courtyard approach. I think it's a good option. So, yeah, I would support this.
I would also agree with what Alderman Potts has said. I like the fact that it is an up to and an and so it gives the developer and/or the particular property the ability to facilitate whether they could build these in. I also agree with Mr. Franks in that we need to be cautious about not restricting our ability to do affordable or workforce housing.
And I do need to chime in on that one as well. I'm glad you just said that. I agree. Mr. Franks and I serve on the Housing Commission. This is something that's, we're passionate about. We need to make sure that we have that focus. I see heads nodding over there, which is good.
We'll actually get into that in a moment with an added guiding principle.
Yeah, it's coming.
And Ms. McLemore right there. I apologize.
It's okay. It's next item.
Okay. We're going to move to another topic item. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, nice segue, thank you for that. Switching gears completely, all the topics tonight are kind of different, so just kind of bear with us. But we'll jump into housing. We met with Alderman Brown a few months ago. He suggested we add a new guiding principle to the plan focused on housing. We brought that up at the October joint workshop. Everybody seemed to be on board with that. So we have created a draft guiding principle focused on housing. There are kind of 6 pieces to this, and I'll provide a quick high-level overview of what we've drafted. And it's largely based on the housing analysis that was conducted as part of this whole Envision Franklin update. But in bullet number A, it talks about encouraging a range of price points and also more for sale options. Throughout the outreach, we heard from a lot of folks in the community interested in more home ownership opportunities, so we did want to encourage that. as part of the guiding principle. In bullet B, we talk about missing middle housing, which would be duplexes, cottage courts, townhomes, small-scale multifamily accessory dwellings, these types of housing units that have largely been missing over the last several decades. There just haven't been a large number of them built across the U.S. That's why it's dubbed missing middle housing. So there's a bullet in there to encourage those sorts of units that are at that neighborhood scale. They're at a lower residential scale. And then bullet C gets to the desire for more accessory dwelling units on existing lots, but also in new construction. And then D refers to senior-friendly housing. Franklin is an AARP age-friendly community, and there are different preferences and needs for the senior population in terms of what they're looking for with housing. So we want to further encourage Franklin to be an age-friendly community in terms of housing choices that will come on the market. And then also E gets to the point that Franklin's a regional employment hub. We have a lot of people commuting into Franklin for jobs. The more jobs that we create, the more pressure it puts on our housing market. So we do want to recognize that. And then lastly, we want to recognize the importance of supporting our local nonprofit partners like the Hard Bargain Association, the Franklin Housing Authority, and the Community Housing Partnership, and the importance of supporting their efforts and making sure that our plans and policies align kind of with what they're wanting to do and vice versa. So those are basically the tenets of the Housing Choices Guiding Principle. Thank you.
Chair, just comment, Scrooge has a comment. I love this, I really do, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 aldermen and the mayor here tonight. And I'd like to say, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful that this is in our document. We have no power to spend any money, but I will say to you guys, and I'm gonna say I'm Scrooge, because 1991, whatever, when I was elected, I forget when it was, guys, wonderful. But unless some money's put behind this, I've given up on affordable housing here in Franklin, and I'm just gonna say, I'm praying about it, but I've given up on it. Wonderful to have this here, but those of you who control the purse strings and can do something about it, because prayer without works is dead, and this statement and all these A, B, C through Z is nothing unless we put some money behind it, or we get some money from the federal government and do something about it. And I'm gonna say, I'm Scrooge, I'm praying, but I'm just saying, we've been doing this for years, since the 90s, since the 80s, and I'll just stop. But it's great, and everything that we said here is great, but if we don't do anything about it, we'll be hoping and praying for this for a long time. So I'm hoping, I know you guys' heart's in the right place, everybody wants it, but I've just given up on it. And I hate to say that, but it's just the truth.
Well, don't give up yet, Marcia, because we have been putting money on affordable housing with the Housing Authority. We have done quite a bit there. I agree with you that it needs to be more than just a statement. And there are big gaps that we do need to fill to move forward. We are working with the Hill property to get some, we're putting some money in that. So, and there may be some other options that are out there that are happening kind of behind the scenes that maybe in the future might pull more money in.
Alderman Potts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll also chime in on this because Marcia and I have spoken about this several times. I attended the Power of 10 meeting that took place just a couple of months ago. I've got the slide pulled up right here, and I apologize that we can't put it on the overhead here, but I'll just read it. This is proposed legislation that's coming up, and it's the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And it is, the Senate number is 1557 and the House number is 3238, but it's for increasing housing credit allocations, maximizing affordable housing production, preserving existing affordable housing, and better serve hard-to-reach communities. And so that's out there, and the co-sponsors right now are Senator Blackburn, Representative Cohen, Representative Fleischman, Representative Kustoff, Representative Burchett, Representative DeJose's, Representative Harshbarger, and Representative Rhodes.
Okay.
So that's there, and it's something we're going to have to follow up on.
This is coming from a landlord of over 30-something years who's struggling now for folks who are the working poor, work every day, honest people who can't afford to buy a house, who cannot afford to hardly rent here, and we struggle, my dad and are still struggling. And we're getting ready to start building. I'm just telling you, it is a struggle. It is a crying struggle for us, and so that's where I'm. So pray for us, and I pray that they get something done. I'm just telling you guys, it is a struggle. It should not be a struggle to live in Franklin. It is a struggle for my tenants to live here. And I'm going to stop, but I'm passionate about this. Okay, so I'll hush. All right.
Yeah, hang on.
How does this overlap or mesh with the item we just discussed?
I get frustrated because I feel like a lot of times that when we're making these statements, and it sounds like we're making statements, and I'm not casting judgment. It's just hard for me to sit here sometimes, Clyde, and for us to make these bold statements like we're doing something. The statement's great, and I'm not, but it's just hard for me to sit here, and I'm not one to do that. Okay, the statements we made, I'm just saying, yes, we need it, but let's be about it.
Well, I don't think any of us are arguing about
Okay,
the
so-
need for the affordable housing. You're not gonna get affordable housing if you've got 50 or 60% open space on something as valuable as everything else is around here. So, I mean, we can, they don't mesh together, that and what was before us, so.
Well, those design concepts are not universal
No,
across the
that's
city.
in a certain
They're
part of
very
town.
specific corridors on the map.
That's in a certain part of town.
What I'd like to say, if it's okay, when we did our continuing education just recently, the best slide in that projection, the best presenter was Alan Thompson with Reagan Smith. And when you go back, and that young lady that was with him, and he nailed it, I'm telling you verbatim, that what Franklin needed and what should be the vision of Franklin, to the extent, who cares about all the legislation and all that other stuff that was in that text, and, the guy that, our lobbyist and who represents our bills, but at the end of the day, what Alan Thompson said struck a real nerve with us and our housing commission, and Alderman Potts and Elman, all of us talked about it last week, that the need for affordable housing workforce, and the fact that Mayor Moore and Vernon and Eric were so gracious to be able to call the Secretary of Housing there from D.C., the only second time she's been out of D.C. under Biden, to come, and of all places, Franklin, and to offer us $58 billion worth of grants that could be utilized in our market to house workforce and affordable housing. And now, Darren and all of them have done a fabulous job, and we have put a lot of faith in the efforts in the providing a diverse housing market. But I feel like that, I love what y'all have done. So y'all have done a fabulous job. Y'all have touched on every point that really covers the future of Franklin and the development of it, and the request for applicants to come in with the property that they have. But it's just something we got to be aware of, like Marcia says, and hopefully, we'll do more than just have it in the language. We'll really make it happen.
Yeah, because it's been in here for the last, every time we have the amendment changes, we put this diversity of housing choices and price points and all, but nothing ever happens. And I always ask the question when we talk about the growth and how we're going to be 42,000 more people, and I ask how are we going to get housing for the people, and they're going to be less than the $2 million and the ones that are the price points that are here now. We've got to take some action. We can change this, and we can change the wording a little bit, but it sounds so much similar. What were some of the new changes that were put in here? I mean, because it seems so similar to me, but we haven't done a lot since we had the last amendment change. We haven't. Now, I will say, Franklin Housing Authority, Community Housing, and Hard Bargain, they're doing some amazing work on the affordable housing. Franklin Housing Authority has actually brought seniors back to Franklin that were born and raised here. And they had moved to Nashville, but they were able to come back to their hometown, and they're living in some of the units at Franklin Housing Authority. And I have to really give them credit for the changes that they've done over in Riddick and Cherokee and Chickasaw. So they're doing a lot when it comes to not workforce, but affordable and low-income housing. And then Hard Bargain as well in community housing. So there have been some strides, but we have a long, long way to go. And we are going to have to consider, what's the $58 billion that you're talking about? I mean, I haven't heard a thing about that.
I mean, maybe Vernon can explain it.
I mean, because we should, you know, we've been talking about housing issues, and if we got $58 billion that we can access, we sure need to know about it.
He's got it with him.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that is, I mean, I am just stunned that, can't believe it.
Happy holidays.
I definitely wanna hear that.
It warms my heart that, you know, when you start talking about housing and the need for housing, because, you know, it's the fabric of every community, and even Franklin's, that people feel safe and comfortable where they live. And when they do that, and you've heard me and we've talked about it as a group, that when people feel safe and comfortable in their house, they start to contribute to their neighborhood and the community.
Right.
And, you know, it's incumbent upon us to work and continue to work on solving this issue. There's no one switch that's going to fix it. And I can assure you, and Mr. Franks had mentioned that we brought the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency that manages Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae loans to Franklin, and put together a group to talk about freeing up some of the monies that they have access to get them in communities to provide incentives. I recently had a talk with a representative from the Tennessee Municipal League about perhaps crafting some legislation at the state level that creates incentives for communities to create affordable and workforce housing, and still make it profitable for the people that are building them. And that's going to take money. But it's going to take that concerted effort that we're starting to get to. And I can assure you that in my career, that's now almost approaching 36 years, and being in Franklin 17 years, that there is an increased awareness and a will to start doing something at the federal and state level. And then locally, it calls on us all.
Right.
To create these communities with those points and guiding principles, and making sure that they do become a part of our community, as well as helping those that build them have the resources. And it's not easy. It's not all going to come from the city or the state or the federal government, but it'll come together if we keep an open mind and seek to try instead of saying no. So stay tuned. I expect we're going to see things at the state level at this legislative session. I don't know how it's going to look, but be assured that we lead by example in this community in many ways, and we'll be a part of it.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gives you a broad overview and gives us some encouragement at this time of year that, you know, it's not done, but we're going to be working on this.
Well, that's good to know,
I
because
have a quick question. I mean, I don't want to get into politics, but our state legislation tends to shy away from federal funding. So will these federal funds be available to municipalities, or will they have to come through the state? Because the state just turned down a lot of money for education because they didn't want federal ties to it.
Well, you know, that's true, but I can assure you that there's folks working to make sure that communities that are willing to do their part will reap the benefits if those funds are to become available at the federal level. So often, you know, it's convenient and it's appropriate for politicians to say underserved communities or underserved neighborhoods. But when it comes to housing, let's create affordable and workforce housing for people, because it's going to help whether it's in an underserved or depressed community or it's in a place like Franklin. If we're creating housing for families whose income fall within that affordable or workforce range, starting to solve the problem. So,
So if the state will accept this federal funds, this is a great idea. But if the state says no, where are we?
Well, what we learned was, you know, any of us can apply through Pinnacle Bank.
yeah, that's the goal.
Or through a bank for the,
So you get it
access
to
to
the
those
local
federal funds, and it didn't have it, it was never mentioned that the state had anything to say about it. It'd be like Mount Pleasant that we all visited in Charleston years ago, where there's workforce housing, and maybe an apartment builder comes in and builds that particular business model that allows that workforce housing. Every 7 years, they remodel those units and, you know, go again. But it is a lot to learn, and the great thing about it is we are seeking it. And it's gonna evolve, something's gonna evolve that there's pieces of land in the city that would be appropriate for that, and, you know.
I'm very optimistic, and I know this is a much broader conversation than what we're talking about now. and
We're running a little.
We're gonna come
long
back
time.
to it, I'm
Okay.
assured. So.
Okay.
And I'm gonna,
All right, thanks, everybody. Nope. We've still got a couple items we've got to cover.
Yes, sir.
I want to say one thing about accessory housing.
Okay.
Whenever you're talking about doing that for existing lots, many years ago, we talked about that. The people who lived on lots, you know, where they bought houses and accessory dwellings were not allowed, did not want that right next to their own house and everything. So please keep in mind, there's a lot more to that than just saying, you know, it sounds good.
Okay,
Excuse me.
we've got to get wrapped up. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. Switching gears again to the building height maximum map. This is found in Appendix F of Envision Franklin. We met with Alderman Berger about a month or two ago, and she had recommended some further reductions in the building height maximum along Cool Springs Boulevard, kind of as you approach MacHatcher and Roper's Knob. We had already moved some of that into the purple, which is a max of 4 stories, but she had suggested even extending that to where the old emissions testing site is located. And we agreed, as staff, we evaluated that and looked at the built environment and the topo and the proximity to Roper's Knob. So are recommending moving that down to 4 stories along McEwen Drive and Cool Springs Boulevard. And I know Alderman Potts has mentioned this area before as well. So as we were looking at the height map, we also noticed a few other areas and are recommending some minor adjustments. So if you look north on the map along Mallory Station Road and General George Patton Drive, we're recommending those little parcels to go to a max of 3 stories, and they back up to Morningside Drive and Avenida. And Morningside Drive are low scale, 1.5 story structures. So we thought 3 is consistent with how we've treated the edge of the regional commerce area along the fringe down other streets in this area. So it's kind of a consistent policy. And then going on the other side of the interstate to the east side, we are recommending reducing the building height maximum from 6 to 4, where those 2 stars are located. And those areas are built out, and they're mostly built out at like a neighborhood commercial type scale of 1 to 5 stories. I think there's one structure that's 5 and everything else is lower than that. So it's a consistent policy to how we've treated the edge of this design concept as it backs up to established single-family residential. Want to have that transition from the higher intensity commercial to the single-family residential or the mixed residential areas. So those are the changes.
Comments, questions?
I'll just drop one comment here. Thank you. I think this is a great move.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, this brings us to the last topic as part of this presentation. This is the Mallory Lane and McEwen Drive intersection. Alderman Berger also brought this up. She's had some concerns with the future build out of this intersection and with the vacant parcels as well as any potential redevelopment of the sites. These parcels fall within the regional commerce design concept. And we have some guidance in the plan about trying to achieve a balance in building heights around intersections. So her concern was that that was maybe too vague and this intersection's too important. So she suggested some more specific guidance. So we've laid out a draft of what that could include, and I've labeled the parcels. The parcel with the number 1 on is this actually came up earlier, and I didn't know what it was called, the Coolio office building. It's 2 stories. It sits up on a little bit of a knoll.
It's actually Kulo.
The Kulo. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. The Coolio's, yeah, that was.
He's a rapper.
Yeah, well. Oh my gosh, the lyrics are like flashing back all of a sudden. So, so for this parcel, the recommendation is a height max of 4 stories, and that would blend in pretty well given what McEwen Town Center is proposing and the topo for this site. For parcel 2, it's the vacant tract between Centennial High School and McEwen Drive, and it's flat. It looks pad ready. The recommendation would be up to 8 stories for that site, which would be a little less than the Drury Hotel. And then the parcels with a 3 on them would be building heights maybe up to 8 stories if the massing and scale is graduated. And by that, we mean a 20-foot building step back should be utilized along the street frontage no higher than after the 4th story. So once the 4th story hits, we'd want a building step back to kind of help break up the massing and kind of highlight the pedestrian realm and keep the lower part of the building pedestrian scale. So that's what staff is thinking, and wanted to get some additional input from the Planning Commission and Board on this.
Okay. Comments, questions? Commissioner?
My initial reaction, I'm trying to look at on Google Maps here about the topography, but the 2 corners, not the Whole Foods parking lot, but the other 2, 8 seems really high compared, but does that area sit lower than the road? To where 8, I mean, by the time you get to road level?
Number 1 is really high.
Number 1 is very high on a hill. On the east side of Mallory Lane,
Yeah.
it's not a significant topo difference from the road to those sites. The one on the south side is a little higher than the roadway. But
I see that.
the zoning today allows 12 stories.
That's
of
helpful
these.
context. Well, I would certainly be on board with 8 over 12. That one's an easy decision.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think looking at this, lowering those areas, especially around here, makes a lot of sense, especially we got to see what's going on in McEwen Center, more walkable, more lower scale, and I think that makes a lot of sense to look at this.
Other comments? Alderman? Okay. Mayor?
Commissioner Mann's comments top the best of the night. 8's better than 12.
Okay. I think we've spoken.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'll close with the next steps. The Williamson County Growth Plan, that process is still ongoing. The coordinating committee has voted on a countywide growth plan, and we anticipate that to go to our Board of Mayor and Aldermen in February, but we don't have any firm dates at this point. So we'll kind of have to wait and see how that goes. But the Envision Franklin update is tied to the growth plan in terms of the boundaries and what the areas that we're planning for. So hopefully that will continue to go smoothly. In terms of Envision Franklin, we'll make these final refinements and do a quick internal review and then submit to law for their 30-day review. And then once we get that back and the UGB and the growth plan is hopefully adopted or going through the adoption process, we will bring the updated Envision Franklin to a BOMA work session and then to a BOMA voting meeting for a recommendation vote. And then ultimately it will end up at the Planning Commission for the final adoption. Thank you.
Because it is only a planning commission.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Okay.
You need to put some red on.
Can I-
Give you a
Any other
leaf.
business?
Can I make one comment?
What?
We're
As long as it's a
actually
short
kind of on time. On the housing choices slide, just real quick. When we're talking about accessory dwellings and and senior friendly, I'm thinking that applies a lot to the core of Franklin. It has the historic zoning overlay, and a lot of that seems to conflict with the historic zoning ordinance. And I know when I was on the commission, we had proposals to redo sheds. They were non-contributing, but in a historic district, and it was really difficult to do that. So I think it'd be worthwhile to rethink our goals in comparison to that document as well, because I think that there's a lot of, I very much remember one person brought one, they wanted to add on to their house or build an extra cottage, and it had to be the same height, even though the way the topography was, it wouldn't have been taller than their house. You know, some unintended consequences like that could really help us make better use of some of the lots that I think the citizens want to use them for in the core. So I wanted to say that.
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So
So moved. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.